In this video, we will talk about how the upheaval changed my perception on Hyrule's belief system and why there is a problem with the goddess statues. If you find this subject matter interesting, subscribe to the channel, it will help to keep our research effort going. Hyrule has a troubled relationship with the gods. It didn't used to be this way. The religion and mythos of the kingdom were never simple to understand, far from it. They are some of the most convoluted stories I've ever heard, but while supernatural, they seem to, by and large, be historical. Shrouded in mystery and unknowns, of course, but still factual. I mean, the hero literally hears the goddess speaking to him, right? How can you not be a believer in those circumstances? And yet, the upheaval didn't shake up just the literal foundations of the kingdom, it also shook up the spiritual, by laying bare before us the long history of worship, not just of gods, but also of real people, fallible and mortal. You don't just walk away from something like this. You start to question and dig. So dig I did, and the more I dug, the less sure I became of validity, well, of everything. While the worship of the Zonai and Ganondorf is the most obvious example of Hyrule's religious history being much less magical and spiritual than expected, I'd actually like to begin this breakdown with something else completely, something much more concerning, though it seems to have largely slipped past most of us. So, the statues. Hylia's statues are present in every settlement and a few other key spiritual locations. They seem old. Who made them? In the springs, they stand on pedestals of ancient Hylian make, but they themselves are clearly either made out of a completely different material or much older and weathered. One of them is even in the Zonai Temple of Time, and it doesn't fit with its surroundings there too. Statue of a goddess isn't a symbol found anywhere else in the ruins left of Zonai anyway, so why? Maybe those statues have been made by Zonai descendants, a race I've talked about at length some time ago already. Or maybe they predate even the Zonai themselves, which would be a bit menacing if correct. Just statues existing outside of time and space, operating whenever a new settlement is built. It'd be very freaky, wouldn't it? So, this may sound like a stupid question, but how do we actually know that the voice the hero hears through these statues is Hylia? I'm serious. This is a serious question. Recall your interactions with the statues. Does any of them ever introduce itself? I struggle to believe that this is what we are talking about, but look, the running assumption has been for years that Hylia is a goddess who, due to her domain over light and time, exists outside of time and just uses these statues to speak through to chosen people. That was the impression. But then, not only did one of these statues get overtaken by a whole other spirit, and while said spirit was in a weakened state at that, but also these three let a secret slip. They are all individuals. All the statues. They aren't channels for a single person on the other side. They are individuals. They are independent from each other. They speak for themselves. The statues of the springs, they each individually spoke to the hero, worried, for they've lost the connection to the Mother Goddess statue. Mother Goddess statue! This whole exchange is very revealing for a few reasons. Firstly, it very obviously informs us that all the statues have a spiritual connection, very specifically to the Mother statue, but not each other. Have they had the ability to communicate laterally, the remaining two spring statues would be aware of the conversation Link had with the first, but crucially, they weren't. Secondly, Mother Goddess statue is a title that, very strongly might I add, implies hierarchy. And finally, this entire situation also tells us that the state of the voice within the statue is directly tied with the statue itself. Just the toppling of the mother statue was enough for others to lose their connection with it and to silence its voice when visited. In other words, we have a multitude of statues. They exist in a hierarchy. Each of them is an individual who has a connection to the mother statue but not to each other, though they are aware of the other's existence. Just toppling the statue is enough to silence its voice. Finally, they are all fueled by offerings of dragon parts. When fed, the statues are able to harness the magic of the dragon and transfer it upstream to the mother statue, physically restoring it. Do we still want to think that the voice that can be heard coming from these is Hylia? Do you understand the magnitude of this for the entire belief system we got used to in Hyrule? If the statues aren't Hylia, then where is she? What even is a Hylia? Well, according to the myths, Hylia is supposed to be a goddess who wielded sealing light and time powers. Long ago, in time immemorial, she fought against a dark god and his army of monsters, known as the Demon King Demise, and managed to seal him. She knew, however, that the seal wouldn't last forever, and so she raised parts of her domain skyward to keep future generations of Hylians safe. Then she shed her godhood and made sure that her light and time powers will be passed down for generations within the royal family of Hyrule to keep all future generations safe. So according to Princess Zelda's account of the imprisoning war, she was recognized to possess sealing light and time powers. Long ago, in time immemorial, she fought against a dark god and his army of monsters known as the Demon King Ganondorf, and with help of the first king of Hyrule, managed to seal him. She knew, however, that the seal wouldn't last forever, so she raised parts of her domain skyward to keep future generations of Hylians safe. Then, by becoming an immortal dragon, she ascended to godhood and made sure that the light and time powers of her distant ancestors will be passed down through generations within the royal family of Hyrule to keep all future generations safe. The thing with myths is that they are old stories. They are passed down from generation to generation and get warped through constant retellings of them. As far as the sources of records on historical events go, myths and legends are some of the weakest ones. That's why they can't really be trusted. But this is almost completely spot on. This isn't just a parallel, is it? No, what we have been just told is the historical truth of the myth we knew and thought of as gospel for so long. Hylia isn't some immortal god outside of space and time. She couldn't have been speaking to anyone through these statues because she was never connected to them in the first place. Instead, this entire time she was up there, in the sky, watching over her domain as an immortal dragon of light. This is what Hylia is. It's a dragon! If that's the case, then what of Demise? The story of Demise is, and always has been, inseparably tied to the story of Hylia. If Hylia isn't a primordial god, but rather a time-traveling princess turned dragon whose distant ancestors happened to possess powers of time and powers of light, then what does that imply about Demise? Demise is such a weird name anyway, isn't it? Frankly, it's not really a name, it's more of a concept. Demise is a god who's bent on bringing demise to the kingdom, or someone who is the kingdom's demise. We know that the historical stand-in for Demise in Hylia's myth was Ganondorf, and I think that this is for a good reason. Ganondorf has been named the Demon King by the people of the ancient past, the title, so far, only associated with the Dark God himself. This title isn't just for show, as Ganondorf possesses very peculiar powers. He is able to produce and control gloom, black and red substance, which can harm living creatures as long as they remain within the darkness. However, the capabilities of gloom are much further reaching than just being a harmful miasma. It is a substance capable of creating a completely new subset of creatures, monsters. Upon seizing a secret stone, Ganondorf immediately began spawning monsters everywhere. He wasn't just summoning them from elsewhere, he literally started creating them out of thin air, right inside of the beating heart of the kingdom. This was not a power granted by a secret stone. Remember, secret stones only enhance abilities their users already possess. If Ganondorf was able to create monsters at that moment, it means he always had the ability to do so. This is even corroborated by the story told by Sonia to her servant. According to one of the stone tablets found in the sky, sometime around the Hyrule's founding, monsters began appearing and making the lives of common folk miserable. What this means is that monsters did not exist prior to these incidents. While it is not stated directly, this does imply that someone has suddenly created those monsters and sent them to cause suffering across the kingdom. At that point, the royal couple has stepped in and dealt with the problem by sealing those monsters away, which again implies that after this point, the kingdom no longer had monster issues. Ganondorf is called the Demon King because he is literally the source of the monsters plaguing Hyrule. After acquiring the Secret Stone, he has rapidly created an army for himself and marched through Hyrule, leveling everything lying in his path. He was the demise of the kingdom, which is what later generations remembered him by. Demise! While Ganondorf himself would be sealed later, Hyrule was never able to rid itself of his creations completely. Monsters remained, and anytime one was slain, it would be brought back by pulses of Ganondorf's power, seeping away from his body and permeating the very earth itself. According to the Legend of Demise and the Hero of the Sky, the sealed Dark God would attempt to break the seal early on in Hyrule's history, and eventually succeed through the trickery of his servant and use of magical artifacts. This is, of course, but another one of the legends which, as we've learned, can't be trusted as an accurate record of history. However, we know for a fact that there is a grain of truth to this story. Both the garbs of the ancient Hero of the Sky and the weapon he wielded, said to have become the legendary Master Sword through tempering in sacred flames, have survived through the ages. So, perhaps King Raru's seal really did undergo some sort of a crisis early on in history. However, the exact details of it are, unfortunately, no longer available to us, as no written records of this event remain. Just the story, retold over and over again for generations. While Ganondorf has never ascended into godhood, he always was, and until the very end still remained, just a mortal Gerudo. Due to the seal placed upon him, his influence and his legend spread across the land. Even though he was merely a mortal, he gained worshippers, just like Zonai before him, and became a god in spite of his mortality. At least in the eyes of Viga and people like them. Now, since we've talked about Hylia and Demise already, we can move up in the hierarchy. Yes, not even the Golden Goddesses are safe from scrutiny now. The Golden Goddesses are said to be creators of Hyrule. It is a creation myth, like many others. There used to be chaos, and from this chaos, Din formed dead matter, Nehru gave it order and Farore life. Then, as their work was completed, goddesses departed, leaving behind an artifact, a set of golden triangles, said to possess the power to grant wishes, and bestow incredible abilities upon a person who would own even a piece. While that story isn't paralleled by any new historical accounts we now have access to, as it was the case with Hylia and Demise, there still are issues to be raised with it. Firstly, the Triforce. The problem of the Triforce is that it can be pretty confidently traced back through history as a symbol, with no inherent properties other than being used for religious worship. Recently, I've talked at length about the historical timeline of the Zonai and their culture. If you look closely at the relics we have of them, you'll notice the clear absence of the Triforce symbol in all of their earliest architecture and even the pristine white buildings of Raru era. The earliest appearance we have of the Triforce is on ritual clothing, connected to the worship of the dragons of the springs. The three triangles have likely represented a religious trinity, three voices of three springs served by three dragons, or equally important in the minds of ancients. What better to represent them as than three identical triangles? We know from the voices in the statues that hunting a dragon, roaming the sky and offering a shard split from its body was a part of a sacred rite. I can imagine that a ceremony like this would require the participant to have the wisdom to find the dragon, the courage to approach it, and the power to obtain a scale from it, thus leading to the formation of three values, later assigned to the Triforce and the springs themselves. This is obviously speculation on my part, as we lack hard evidence. However, it is clear that early on, the Triforce was only on the minds of priests, and not the political body of the kingdom. And even then, it wasn't a particularly well-established and important symbol anyway. I'm saying that because Raru and Sonia are both priests. They are religious people. Confirmed! No doubt about that. Sonia is explicitly called a Hylian priestess by a servant in her diary, and Raru is wearing Zonai ceremonial robes of the Spring of Courage, although altered to no longer resemble Farosh. Both Raru and Sonia wear the Triforce symbol, Raru on his ritual clothing, Sonia on her ritual tattoos. But notice that neither wears this symbol prominently. In both cases, Triforce is easily missable if one isn't paying attention. Raru's is on a rim of the robe, literally dragged across the floor as he walks, and Sonia's is a tiny marking just above the wrist, easily lost between the lines, forming much more visible eye symbols present on both her hands and shoulders. And the nail in the proverbial coffin, as they founded Hyrule, Raru and Sonia are said to have built the Temple of Time. The temple, a sacred place of worship. It makes sense, as they were both people of religious background. Well, okay then! They built a temple, very important. A good place to decorate with a very important symbol. So what is the Temple of Time adorned with? Dragons and suns! No Triforce in sight. If the Triforce was a literal magical artifact, granted to Hylians and Zonai by the gods, something entire wars would be fought over due to its incredible power, and a center, a beating heart of religious culture of the kingdom, you'd think that, of all places, a temple would be a good place to depict it. But it is not depicted there. It isn't depicted anywhere on Zonai buildings. Any Zonai buildings, even the Zonai descendants, who existed throughout the bulk of the more recent history, preferred to present the Holy Trinity as animals, a dragon, a boar, and an owl. Triforce only started becoming prominent in art and architecture at the twilight of the Zonai descendant era. It appears on the tapestry depicting the Great Calamity next to the princess of that time, and creeps up on old Hylian architecture. All that is to say, the cultural importance of the Triforce is something that grew over innumerable years and only started becoming relevant fairly recently. A far cry from a gift of the creator gods, capable of destroying the world with just a single wish. That said, such a symbol was briefly spotted during the fight against the Calamity Ganon from a few years back. As our dear princess used her magical powers, the three triangles appeared ever so briefly. That can mean one of two things. Either the artifact itself did, in fact, exist, but was forgotten about, and only resurfaced as a symbol centuries later through the Cult of Springs, or it is a symbol that is relevant to spirits and magic which inhabit this world, which would in turn inspire the Zonai and other worshippers of the springs to start wearing it themselves. And then that symbol would eventually grow and be turned into a legend over time. probably merging with old stories about secret stones, leading to the tales of Triforce's magical properties. Frankly, if I am correct in what I said about the dragons in the last video, then even the wish-granting property of the Triforce could have been inspired by tales of Zonai artifacts. To be honest with you, I am leaning towards the latter. It just makes more sense to me, given what we know. Either way, all of that does not look good on the Golden Goddesses. Do they even exist? What evidence do we have? None! If I had to guess, the myth of the Golden Goddesses who departed for the skies after creating the world arose, like many other things in modern Hyrule's culture, from the Zonai and their ritual worship of dragons. It's just a wild guess, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think that Golden Goddesses are dragons, just like Hylia. In the early days, long before Hyrule's founding, Zonai heard voices, coming from the sacred springs. Eventually, a religion was created around worshipping those voices. They would have oracles, ceremonies, rituals, all of that. Then, one day, that growing devotion and religious high reached a breaking point, and the oracles swore to serve the springs forever, swallowed the forbidden gummies, and became dragons. Their names? Faror, Din, and Nehru, later twisted into Farosh, Dinral, and Neidra. Which in turn would mean that the actual divine or magical spirits which gave birth to the worship of the Golden Goddesses actually were the spring statues themselves. And as for the creation of the world itself, at this point I'm willing to suspect it has looked something like this. Anyway, since we're back at the subject of the statues, who are they? We already concluded that Hylia doesn't really exist, at least not in the way we all thought she did. We suspect that the situation with the Golden Goddesses is similar. We know that the voices we heard through statues are multiple creatures who aren't representing the gods at all, just themselves. So what are they? Honestly, I have no idea. I'm a giant winged lizard who happens to be a scholar, don't really commune with the spirits. However, if I had to guess, I'd say they are probably some immortal beings, magical and or spiritual in nature, who inhabit the statues and draw power from the land and flowing waters of their springs in particular. They aren't quite a hive, but they do share some characteristics with it, and finally, they aren't malevolent. They are just going along with whatever people think they should call them and are willing to help in exchange for worship and feeding them magical power, which is a fair trade, I suppose. And notably, they aren't the only such creatures either. There are also bargainer statues, openly calling each other brothers, suggesting that they are also a collective of statue spirits rather than a single being. The main difference between the bargainers and the goddess statues is that bargainers don't seem to follow any sort of hierarchy. They are all equal comrades. Finally, there is also the horned statue, a lone spirit who seems to be rather mischievous in nature. It claims to have been moved by Hylia between the events of the Calamity and the upheaval, which can technically be true if Hylia is indeed a persona of Zelda. In the time between the two events, Zelda has moved in with Link, very close to the old location of the horned statue. If the statue for whatever reason didn't like Zelda's presence and changed its location, it could technically claim that it was moved by Hylia. Though, yeah, it is a stretch. More likely, it is just messing with Link while trying to draw attention of potential worshippers from Lookout Landing, since it didn't have much luck with people of Hateno. And that leaves us only with one last set of gods, the Zonai, the ones who gave a start to this entire train of thought. Look how far we've come. Anyway, the Zonai were never gods, though they did pass into legend as gods. According to the myth, the royal family of Hyrule carries the literal holy bloodline, tracing back directly to the goddess Hylia, which is what gives the ladies of the family their magical sealing powers. I imagine that belief is very convenient to the royal family, however, it is very far from true. As we've discussed prior, Zelda's bloodline did not start at the goddess. It started with a random Hylian girl who happened to have time powers, and a random Zonai clergyman who happened to have sealing light powers. These two happened to form a union through marriage, giving birth to mixed offspring, carrying abilities of both. Which also means that maybe if Hyrulean royal family was more open to interracial marriages, our Zelda would also be capable of commanding the four elements like some sort of an avatar or something, but that's just a random thought, pay no mind. Anyway, this history means that the powers Zelda possesses are not holy, far from it, they are just magic, like any other magic of any other person from any other race. It's not really all that special in Hyrule. I can do magic too, even stones and dirt have magic. Zelda's magic is only special because it is the only known remaining source of magic capable of producing seals, effective against Ganondorf, his gloom, and its derivatives, such as malice. That's it. Nothing holy about that, just chance. At best, fate. That belief, the supposed holiness of the royal family, can be, like many other things, traced back to Zonai. Zonai arrived in Hyrule surrounded by incredible technology, while its native inhabitants were still primitive. Thus, it is entirely understandable that these early Hylians, upon seeing people descend from the sky on flying machines, thought, why, those must be gods themselves! We have proof of that being the case, between records Zelda mentions, through writings of the royal servant, to the story told by Mineru, who also claims her race to be at the very least descending from the gods themselves. But Zonai were no gods, they were just people, mortal and fallible. Their advanced knowledge and technology gave them an edge over primitive Hylians and served as the cornerstone to their godly status, which I am sure they never abused whatsoever. From this relationship of Hylian worship towards the Zonai, and the union between a Zonai and a mere Hylian, what a misalliance, am I right? Came the conviction that the royal family carries the blood of gods within its veins, which then gave rise to legends and stories of their might, power and heroic deeds. There is but one conclusion to draw from all this. The history of Hyrule is extremely long and convoluted and messy. And, surprisingly, in this world filled with divine spirits and magic, a form of atheism is a valid way of looking at it all. That's two conclusions, whoops. Ah well, to all of you who made it this far, thank you for listening. If you liked my nonsense, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe leave a comment while you're at it telling me just how hot of a take this is. To all commenters who speculated before that the goddesses might not be real, y'all came to this conclusion far earlier than I did. Good job! A huge thank you to my draconic sages, Jardind, Von Bob, Fiona, Giga Chickney, Merburb, Lofar T. Destroy, and Medic Shy. See ya!